Everyone feared the mafia boss when he controlled the room. Nobody stayed when he could no longer control his own life. Alexander Hayes had spent decades building a name that made people listen before he even spoke. In Chicago, his reputation was built on power, influence, and the ability to make impossible problems disappear with a single decision. His mansion stood on a quiet hill outside the city, a place where important people came seeking approval and where everyone understood one simple rule: Alexander Hayes was always in control. But everything changed after the accident that left him unable to walk. The man who once moved through the world with absolute confidence now sat in a wheelchair inside the same home that once represented his strength. The walls were still covered with expensive artwork. The office still held years of achievements. The city lights still shined beyond the windows. Yet the man inside felt like a stranger in his own life. Since that moment, assistant after assistant arrived at the Hayes estate and left before the day was over. Some could not handle his cold attitude. Others could not accept how much his life had changed. They saw a powerful man who had lost his independence. They saw a difficult responsibility. They never looked deeper. Alexander noticed every goodbye, every empty desk, every quiet departure, and each one confirmed the thought he refused to admit. Maybe people respected him only because of what he could provide. Maybe without his power, he was no longer worth staying for. Then Maya Robinson arrived. She was not what Alexander expected. She was a 34-year-old single mother with a calm voice, a practical attitude, and a life far removed from the world of wealth and influence surrounding the Hayes family. She did not arrive with fear in her eyes. She did not arrive trying to impress him. She arrived because she needed a job and because she believed every person deserved to be treated with basic respect. When she entered his office for the first time, Alexander waited for the usual reaction. He expected hesitation. He expected discomfort. Instead, Maya simply looked around, listened carefully, and asked what he needed. That simple question surprised him more than any compliment could have. "You are not afraid of me?" Alexander asked. Maya looked at him calmly. "I do not think fear is the same thing as respect." The answer stayed in the room longer than either of them expected. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who agreed with him, avoided difficult conversations, and followed his commands. But this woman was different. She was not trying to challenge his authority. She was simply refusing to forget his humanity. Maya noticed the small things others ignored. The frustration behind his silence. The loneliness behind his anger. The person hidden beneath the title. And Alexander noticed something about her too. She was not there because of his money. She was not there because of his reputation. She was there because she believed quitting was easy, but showing up for someone was what truly mattered. For the first time in months, Alexander wondered if the person standing beside him was not another assistant passing through his life. Maybe she was the first person who had actually seen him. Alexander Hayes had spent years learning how to read people, but he never expected that one of the few people who could understand him would be someone the world often overlooked. Before Maya Robinson entered his life, his mansion had become a place filled with silence. The rooms were large, the furniture was expensive, and every corner showed signs of success. But none of it could replace what Alexander had lost. He was surrounded by everything money could buy, yet he felt further away from people than ever before. For years, Alexander had measured his worth by what he could accomplish. He built businesses. He protected his reputation. He made decisions that influenced the lives of many people. Independence was not just a comfort for him. It was part of his identity. So when his condition changed his daily life, the hardest part was not needing assistance. The hardest part was accepting that the world no longer saw him the same way. Maya noticed this within her first week at the Hayes estate. She saw how Alexander would become quiet whenever someone tried to do too much for him. She noticed how quickly his expression changed when people spoke to him with sympathy instead of respect. Others saw a difficult man. Maya saw someone who was struggling with a new reality. But Maya had her own battles too. Every morning before arriving at the mansion, she prepared breakfast for her 8-year-old daughter, packed school supplies, and made sure everything at home was taken care of before stepping into Alexander's world. She understood what it meant to carry responsibility without recognition. She understood what it felt like when people judged your situation before knowing your story. That was why she never treated Alexander like a problem to solve. She treated him like a person trying to adjust. One afternoon, Alexander tested her patience. He questioned every detail of his schedule, corrected small things, and made it clear that he was used to controlling every part of his day. The assistants before Maya would have taken it personally. They would have seen his attitude as a reason to leave. But Maya simply listened. "You know," she said calmly, "being frustrated does not make you a bad person. But pushing everyone away will make your life much harder." Alexander looked at her in surprise. Nobody spoke to him that way. Not because they respected him, but because they were afraid of his reaction. Maya was different. She was not trying to win an argument. She was trying to help him see something he had ignored. Later that evening, Alexander watched Maya prepare notes for the next day. He noticed the small details. She organized everything carefully. She remembered his preferences. She solved problems before they became problems. But what surprised him most was that she never acted like she was doing him a favor. She acted like she was simply doing her job with dignity. For the first time, Alexander began to question the belief that everyone around him only wanted something from him. Maybe there were still people who valued kindness over influence. Maybe there was someone who could stand beside him without seeing him as a title or a reputation. And that possibility was something Alexander Hayes had not allowed himself to believe in for a very long time. Maya Robinson had learned something about powerful people long before she ever stepped into the Hayes estate. The people with the most influence were often the ones who had the hardest time admitting when they needed someone. She had seen it in different forms throughout her life. Some people hid their struggles behind pride. Others hid them behind silence. But Alexander Hayes had built an entire identity around never showing weakness. And now, every day, he was being forced to face the one thing he had spent his entire life avoiding. He had to let someone else into his world. Maya understood why that was difficult. She was a single mother who had spent years making decisions without anyone else to depend on. She knew what it meant to carry responsibilities quietly. She knew what it felt like to wake up early, take care of her daughter, work long hours, and still find the strength to smile at the end of the day. Her life was not easy, but it had taught her something important. A person's circumstances never told the whole story. That was the lesson Alexander had never learned. One afternoon, Maya arrived at the Hayes mansion and noticed something unusual. Alexander was not in his office. He was sitting near the large window in the living room, looking out at the gardens. The room was peaceful, but the expression on his face showed that his thoughts were somewhere else. Maya did not interrupt immediately. She simply placed his schedule on the table and waited. After a few moments, Alexander finally spoke. "Do you ever get tired of starting over?" The question surprised her. It was not the kind of thing she expected from a man known for being impossible to read. Maya sat nearby, keeping a respectful distance. "Sometimes," she answered honestly. "But starting over does not mean you failed. Sometimes it means you are still trying." Alexander looked at her. He was used to people offering advice that sounded perfect but felt empty. Maya's words were different because they came from experience. She was not speaking like someone who had everything figured out. She was speaking like someone who had survived difficult moments and continued moving forward. Over the following days, Alexander began noticing things about Maya that others had missed. She was patient, but she was not weak. She was kind, but she was not afraid to be honest. She respected him, but she did not treat him like someone above everyone else. That was something Alexander had rarely experienced. Most people either feared him or wanted something from him. Maya simply treated him like a human being. One evening, Alexander asked about her daughter. Maya smiled as she talked about her 8-year-old child's curiosity and determination. Her expression changed completely when she spoke about her family. Alexander noticed the warmth in her voice and realized that Maya carried a strength he had never understood. She had responsibilities that would overwhelm many people, yet she never used them as an excuse to stop caring about others. For the first time, Alexander saw the difference between being powerful and being strong. Power could make people follow orders. Strength allowed someone to keep going when life became difficult. And as Maya continued showing up each day, Alexander began to wonder if the person helping him rebuild his life was not someone he hired. Maybe she was someone who had reminded him that his life was still worth rebuilding. Alexander Hayes had spent most of his life believing that trust was something people earned through years of proving themselves. He surrounded himself with experienced advisors, professionals, and people who understood the importance of loyalty. Yet somehow, the person who challenged his way of thinking the most was the woman who had only recently entered his home. Maya Robinson was not part of his world. She did not come from wealth. She did not understand the rules of influence and reputation that shaped his life. But every day, she showed him something that others had forgotten. Respect did not come from power. It came from how someone treated another person when there was nothing to gain. At first, Alexander still tried to keep a distance. He maintained the same walls he had built for years. He kept conversations short. He avoided personal questions. He wanted Maya to remain an employee, someone with a clear role and nothing more. But Maya refused to treat him like a position. She treated him like a person. One morning, Alexander became frustrated when a schedule change affected his routine. In the past, assistants would apologize immediately or quietly leave. Maya simply looked at the updated information and calmly explained what needed to be adjusted. "You do not have to pretend everything is fine," she said. "But you also do not have to make everything harder than it needs to be." Alexander looked at her, surprised by her honesty. There was no disrespect in her voice. There was no attempt to challenge him. She was simply telling him the truth. And that was something he rarely received. Most people around Alexander told him what they thought he wanted to hear. Maya told him what he needed to hear. Over time, small moments began changing the atmosphere inside the Hayes estate. The staff noticed that Alexander listened more. He asked questions instead of giving immediate instructions. He started paying attention to details he once ignored. Nobody understood what caused the change. But Maya did. She knew that people rarely transformed because someone forced them to. They changed when someone finally gave them a reason to see themselves differently. One afternoon, Alexander watched Maya help organize paperwork while speaking with her daughter over the phone. Her voice softened when she talked about her child. She was carrying responsibilities outside the mansion, yet she still arrived every day with patience and professionalism. Alexander realized something important. Maya was not strong because life had been easy for her. She was strong because life had not been easy, and she continued anyway. That evening, he asked her a question he never expected to ask anyone. "Why do you stay?" Maya paused. She knew what he meant. She knew he was asking why she remained when others had walked away. "Because leaving is sometimes the easiest choice," she replied. "But sometimes people do not need someone to fix everything. They just need someone who believes they are still worth trying for." Alexander remained silent. Those words reached a place that no amount of success or influence had ever reached. For years, he believed people valued him because of what he could provide. Maya was showing him that someone could value him simply because he was human, and that realization was beginning to change everything. Alexander Hayes had spent years believing that needing help was the same as losing strength. It was a belief that shaped every decision he made, every relationship he built, and every wall he placed between himself and the people around him. But Maya Robinson was slowly showing him that there was a difference between depending on someone and allowing someone to stand beside you. She was not taking away his independence. She was helping him find a new version of it. For the first time since his life changed, Alexander began noticing the small moments instead of only focusing on what he had lost. He noticed the way Maya arrived early every morning, even after taking care of her daughter before coming to work. He noticed how she solved problems quietly without needing recognition. He noticed how she never used his condition as a reason to treat him differently. One evening, Alexander found Maya reviewing his schedule in the office. The room was quiet, filled only with the soft sound of pages moving across the desk. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You always seem to know what people need before they say it." Maya looked up and smiled slightly. "I learned to pay attention." Alexander looked toward the city outside the window. "That sounds exhausting." Maya thought about the years she spent taking care of her family, managing responsibilities, and making decisions without anyone noticing. "Sometimes it is," she admitted. "But paying attention helps you understand people." Her answer stayed with him. Alexander had spent his entire life surrounded by people who noticed his position, his influence, and his reputation. Very few noticed him. Maya noticed the person behind the name. As the weeks passed, Alexander became curious about her life. He learned that Maya had faced difficult moments without allowing them to change her kindness. She had experienced disappointment, uncertainty, and challenges that would have made many people give up. But she continued moving forward because her daughter depended on her, and because she believed that difficult seasons did not define a person's entire story. That was when Alexander understood something he had never considered before. Maya was not patient because she had an easy life. She was patient because she knew what it felt like when someone needed understanding instead of judgment. One afternoon, Alexander asked about her past. It was a simple question, but Maya could tell it came from genuine interest. She explained that before becoming his assistant, she had worked several jobs while raising her daughter. She was never the person people noticed first. She was usually the person standing quietly in the background, making sure everything worked. Alexander looked at her differently after hearing that. The same quality that made others overlook her was the quality that made her remarkable. She listened. She observed. She cared. People underestimate you, Alexander said. Maya gave a small smile. People usually underestimate what they do not take the time to understand. Those words stayed with Alexander long after the conversation ended, because he realized he had done the same thing. He had looked at Maya and only seen what she lacked. He had not seen her strength. He had not seen her courage. He had not seen the years of experience that shaped the woman standing in front of him. For the first time, Alexander Hayes wondered if the person helping him rebuild his life was not someone he hired to assist him. Maybe she was someone who was teaching him how to see the world differently. The people around Alexander Hayes began noticing the change before he was willing to admit it himself. The man who once made every decision without hesitation had started listening. The man who once believed emotions were distractions had started paying attention to the people around him. But inside the Hayes estate, not everyone welcomed that transformation. Some members of Alexander's inner circle believed Maya Robinson had become too important in his daily life. They did not understand her influence. They only saw a woman who had entered their world without a powerful name or a wealthy background. To them, she was still someone who did not belong. Maya noticed their doubts, but she did not let them affect the way she worked. She had spent enough of her life being judged by people who never took the time to understand her. She knew that respect was not something demanded. It was something earned through actions. One afternoon, Alexander held a meeting with several trusted members of his organization. The conversation focused on important decisions that would affect the future of his business. In the past, Maya would have stayed outside the room. She would have been expected to remain invisible. But this time, Alexander asked her to stay. The request surprised everyone, including Maya. She has a different perspective, Alexander explained. A few people exchanged uncertain looks. They were not used to seeing Alexander value the opinion of someone outside his usual circle. During the meeting, Maya listened carefully. She did not interrupt. She did not try to prove herself. She simply paid attention to the details others ignored. After several minutes, she noticed something unusual in the information being discussed. A small inconsistency. A decision that did not match previous patterns. A detail that seemed unimportant but could create a larger problem if overlooked. "Can I ask a question?" Maya said calmly. The room became quiet. She explained what she noticed and why it concerned her. At first, some people dismissed the observation. They believed experience mattered more than intuition. But Alexander did not dismiss her. He asked her to explain further. Maya carefully described her reasoning. She did not claim to have all the answers. She simply showed that she had noticed something others had missed. Slowly, the atmosphere changed. The same people who had underestimated her began paying attention. They realized that Maya's strength was not about trying to control the room. Her strength was understanding the room. After the meeting ended, Alexander remained behind. He looked at the documents again and thought about what had happened. Years of experience had taught him to value intelligence, but Maya reminded him that intelligence could come from unexpected places. "You knew they would doubt you," Alexander said. Maya nodded. People usually doubt what they do not understand. Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. "And you are not bothered by that?" Maya smiled softly. "Being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe them." Those words stayed with him. Alexander had spent his life proving people wrong through power and success. Maya proved people wrong simply by staying true to who she was. That evening, Alexander realized something important. The woman everyone saw as ordinary had brought something extraordinary into his life. She did not restore his old world. She helped him build a better one. For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes allowed someone else to influence the way he saw the world. It was not because he had become weaker. It was because he had finally understood that listening did not take away his authority. It strengthened it. The change was subtle, but everyone inside the Hayes estate could feel it. Alexander still carried the same serious expression. He still made difficult decisions. He was still the man people respected and remembered. But something behind his actions had changed. He no longer believed that every problem needed to be handled alone. Maya Robinson had shown him that accepting support was not a sign of failure. It was a sign of trust. However, learning to trust someone was easier than admitting how much he had changed. Alexander had spent his entire life protecting himself from disappointment. He believed that people stayed only when they benefited from being near him. Maya challenged that belief every day. She never asked for special treatment. She never used his situation to gain influence. She simply showed up, did her work, and reminded him that he was still a person beyond his reputation. One morning, Alexander received an unexpected visit from several longtime members of his organization. They came to discuss the future and offered their opinions about the direction of his decisions. In the past, Alexander would have accepted their advice without question. But now he noticed something different. Many of them spoke about protecting his image. Very few spoke about protecting his values. After they left, Alexander sat quietly in his office. Maya noticed his expression and asked if something was wrong. "Everyone around me keeps talking about what I should become," he said. "Nobody asks who I want to be." Maya looked at him carefully. "Maybe because they only know the person they expect you to be." Her answer made him think. For years, Alexander had allowed others to define him by his reputation. The powerful businessman, the untouchable leader, the man who never needed help. But Maya saw something different. She saw someone who had been carrying responsibility for so long that he forgot what it felt like to be understood. Over the following days, Alexander began making decisions differently. He started asking for opinions instead of simply giving orders. He considered ideas from people he once overlooked. And when Maya offered advice, he listened instead of dismissing it. That change did not go unnoticed. The people around him began respecting Maya, not because Alexander demanded it, but because her actions earned it. She never tried to take his place. She simply helped him become better. One evening, Alexander and Maya sat in the quiet garden behind the mansion. The city lights reflected across the distance, creating a peaceful moment away from the pressure of his world. "You know," Alexander said, "most people would have taken advantage of my situation." Maya shook her head. "Most people see opportunities. I see people." Those words stayed with him. Alexander realized that Maya had never been trying to change his position or his power. She was trying to remind him that his value existed beyond both. And for a man who had spent his entire life believing strength meant standing alone, that lesson was the hardest one to accept. But it was also the one he needed the most. The world around Alexander Hayes had changed, but the biggest change was the one happening inside him. For years, he believed his position depended on being untouchable. He believed people respected him because they feared losing his approval. But Maya Robinson had shown him something he never expected to learn. Real respect was not created by distance. It was created through understanding. Yet, even as Alexander began to accept this new way of thinking, a final challenge remained. The people closest to him were watching. They noticed that the man who once made every decision alone was now considering another perspective. Some admired the change. Others questioned it. They wondered if Alexander had become too trusting. They wondered if allowing Maya into his world had made him vulnerable. Alexander heard those concerns, but for the first time, he did not let other people's opinions decide his actions. He had spent years building a life where nobody could question him. Now he was learning that the right people did not question him to challenge his authority. They questioned him because they cared about the choices he made. One afternoon, Alexander received news that forced him to make an important decision about the future of his organization. Several advisors suggested returning to the way things had always been. They believed tradition was safer. They believed changing direction would create uncertainty. Alexander listened carefully. In the past, he would have followed the path that protected his image. But now he thought about something Maya had told him. The easiest choice is not always the right one. Later that day, Alexander asked Maya for her opinion. She was surprised. She knew how much trust that question represented. "You already know what everyone expects you to do," she said. "The question is what you believe is right." Alexander looked at her quietly. He realized she was not giving him an answer because she wanted influence. She was giving him space to find his own. That was the difference between Maya and everyone else. She did not want control over his decisions. She wanted him to make better ones. As the days passed, Alexander made choices that reflected the person he was becoming. He valued honesty over appearances. He valued loyalty over convenience. He began creating a future based not only on strength, but also on responsibility. Maya noticed the change, but she never took credit for it. She understood something important. People could not be changed by force. They had to choose change themselves. One evening, Alexander found Maya preparing to leave after finishing her work. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something, but did not know how. Finally, he spoke. I spent most of my life believing needing someone meant losing power. Maya looked at him. And what do you believe now? Alexander paused before answering. I think the right person does not take away your strength. They remind you that you had it all along. Maya smiled softly. It was a simple moment, but for Alexander, it represented something much bigger. The man who once believed he had to carry everything alone had finally learned that trust was not a weakness. It was a choice. And as he looked toward the future, Alexander understood that the greatest change in his life was not what he had regained. It was what he had finally allowed himself to accept. Months later, people inside the Hayes estate still talked about the changes they had witnessed in Alexander Hayes. Not because he became a different person, but because he finally allowed people to see the person who had always been hidden behind the reputation. The world still knew him as a powerful mafia boss, a man whose decisions carried influence and whose name commanded attention. But the people closest to him knew something else. They knew he had learned the value of patience, trust, and compassion. The greatest transformation was not visible in the way he managed his organization. It was visible in the way he treated the people around him. Alexander no longer measured every relationship by what someone could provide. He no longer believed that needing support meant losing control. He understood that even the strongest people needed someone who reminded them they were more than their responsibilities. Maya Robinson continued working at the Hayes estate, but her role had changed in a way neither of them expected. She was no longer simply an assistant. She was someone Alexander trusted completely, not because she followed every instruction without question, but because she was willing to be honest when honesty mattered most. She had never tried to change his position or take credit for his growth. She simply gave him something he had been missing for years, a reminder that he was still human. Maya's life also changed. She was still the same single mother who worked hard every day for her daughter. She was still the woman who valued kindness over attention and effort over recognition. But now, the people around her finally saw what Alexander had seen from the beginning. Her strength was never about being the loudest person in the room. Her strength came from staying steady when life became difficult. One evening, Alexander and Maya stood together outside the mansion, looking across the city lights. The same place that once represented loneliness now felt different. It felt peaceful. Do you ever think about the day you first arrived here? Alexander asked. Maya smiled. I remember thinking you were the most difficult person I had ever met. Alexander laughed softly, a rare sound from a man who once carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. And now? Maya looked at him. Now I think you were just someone who forgot he was allowed to need people. The words were simple, but they carried the meaning of their entire journey. Alexander had spent years building walls because he believed they protected him. Maya had shown him that sometimes walls only keep people away from the help they need. The mansion that once felt empty became a place filled with understanding. The man who once believed power was everything discovered that respect was far more valuable. And the woman whom many people overlooked became the person who reminded him of his own worth. Their story was never about one person saving another. It was about two people from different worlds teaching each other something important. Alexander taught Maya that her voice deserved to be heard. Maya taught Alexander that his value was never determined by what he could do alone. And that day, the world remembered something that power often forgets. The strongest person is not always the one who stands above everyone else. Sometimes, it is the person who chooses kindness when nobody expects it, and who refuses to give up when everyone else has already walked away.